Hey, Arden Men. Today we're going to look at one verse in the Genesis account, Genesis 2:15, and it says this: "And the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." One of the things that we talk about as Hard Men is what is biblical manhood? Well, one of the things biblical manhood is that we would work heartily for the Lord. And that idea that Paul would say, hey, we need to work with all of our hearts to the Lord. Part of it, he gets it from this Genesis account. So here we have Genesis 2, not Genesis 3. So this is before the fall of man. This is before sin. We see that God put the man in the garden for a purpose. So he's in paradise with purpose. And the purpose is to work it and to keep it. Those two words are interesting. If you look at those words, work, it can also mean to provide service, to toil. Even that word is translated sometimes in the Old Testament scriptures as worship, like the temple work of the priest to worship the Lord. So this idea of work and worship, they're sort of connected together as we see through the Old Testament scriptures. And that's because it's intentional. That in the beginning, God put Adam in this garden to work, to cultivate, to take what he has and to make it into something better. And that work is actually supposed to be an act of worship. We're doing this under God, for God, to serve our neighbor, to make the world better, to take creation and pull it forward. So your work should be, if you see it through the lens of the gospel, as Paul clearly does in Colossians, your work is worship. So work is not a product of sin. Work is a purpose given to us by God to worship Him, to love our neighbor, and to make the world a better place. And then it says, and to keep it. That's like to guard it. And that word especially shows up in the priestly work in the temple. They're supposed to guard the temple. They're supposed to keep it holy, keep it from being profane. So this idea of God has put man in this garden to till and cultivate, to use his hands in an act of worship to God, but also to guard it, to keep it as a place that's like God intends it to be, a holy place. So I want you to think about your work for a moment. That your work, whether it be at your house, whether it be at work, it's supposed to be an act of service and worship to God. And it's also supposed to be one that is met with holiness, that you're doing in reverence and awe and fear of the Lord, that you're doing it the way God would have you to do. So I want us to think about this morning as you meet up with your group, talk about how can you connect your work as service and worship to God? How can you see it as a way to worship God? And how can you make sure your work is done in a holy way so you're actually keeping and protecting this garden that God has given us called the world? So I want to end now with a little insert from this book. It's called Garden City by James Comer. And it's John Mark Comer. Great book. My brother-in-law actually gave this to me, so shout out to Logan. But it is really good on work and worship and this whole idea of garden city and what our work is supposed to be. So I want to read a little passage from page 62. It says this: "When you think of Eden, don't think of a public park with a lawn, a playset, a flower bed or two, where God hands Adam a lawnmower and says, keep it tidy. Think of a violent, untamed wilderness teeming with beauty, but no infrastructure, no roads, no bridges, no cities, no civilization. And God says, go make a world." Adam wasn't a landscape maintenance employee. He was an explorer, a cartographer, a gardener, a designer, an architect, a builder, an urban city planner, a city maker. That's a really cool way to think about Eden. It wasn't this like where everything's perfect. No, it's actually untamed wilderness. Even the account of Genesis 2 tells us, hey, there's gold and there's stones and there's onyx, but they're there, but they haven't been brought out. They haven't been used in a way that's going to be creative and to make culture and to make the world better. That's where Adam comes in, the cultivator of God's creation, to make it into something even better. So I love that idea. And then I'll end on page 66, and it says this: "You are modern day Adam or Eve, The world is what's left of the garden, and your job is to take all the raw materials that are spread out in front of you, to work it, to take care of it, to rule it, to subdue, to wrestle, to fight, to explore, and to take the creation project forward as an act of service and worship to the God who made you. That's a cool task. That's what you are supposed to do with your work, with your hands, with everything God's given you, to look around at all the raw material that God has given you in your work week, this week, and to take it and as an act of worship and service to God, make the world better, serve your neighbor, be a good worker, be a good employee, do something great to work and to keep this garden as it grows in to a garden city. So hey, let's talk about work this morning, and let's make sure as men, we know what our work is. It's not something that's because of the fall. No, our work was part of our purpose in paradise. And today, it's how we make this world a little bit more like paradise.